My point being, the United States objective was achieved there without boots on the ground, wasn't it?
Well, no, that was Turkey's objective.
Yes.
In the United States, that was not our objective. We weren't like Turkey armed a rebel group in Syria. Is that what we're going to do? Okay, again, that would be a coherent plan. Like we have picked a group. Pompeo said over the weekend, we like the MEK or the Kurds or whoever. We're going to arm them and provide them weapons and intelligence. That's what Turkey did. And I think they ended up having kind of catastrophic success in Syria. I don't even think that Turkey planned on that group so easily toppling the Assad regime.
In today's video, Tim Miller absolutely annihilates Piers Morgan on Piers Morgan Uncensored. Iran isn't an easy target either. It's a much bigger, more complex country with deep regional influence, and experts have long said airstrikes alone won't fully stop something like a nuclear program. So if the objective isn't clear, it raises a bigger concern. How does this actually end? But before we dive into today's video, make sure to subscribe if you want to see more videos like this one.
Tim Miller, it seems like there's a lot of hoops being jumped here to try and explain what is, to me, I've known Donald Trump a long time. There's been a clear change in his attitude towards meddling in foreign countries and foreign wars, and in particular in the Middle East. And, he might have perfectly good reasons for doing it, but it's certainly a very different rhetoric now that he's using to what he was using when he was campaigning to be re-elected. This problem, it seems to me, with the attack on Iran is a massive country. It has a very ruthless, very large regime, which basically extends to all aspects of Iranian society. There are at least 1.5 million Revolutionary Guard, regular army, paramilitaries, possibly as many as 2 million, none of whom at the moment appear ready to throw in the towel as Donald Trump has asked them to. So if people do rise up in the way that Donald Trump would like, his utopia is that all these airstrikes bully the regime in such a way that the people sense their moment and they rise up and they overthrow them. But at the moment, they would be facing, a lot of them, immediate death, as we saw when the recent protests were repressed. And that seems to me to be the fundamental flaw here in what Donald Trump wants to happen and the reality on the ground.
A lot of that sounds right to me, Piers. Look, this is obviously a betrayal of his campaign promises. I mean, that MAGA supporters can spin it however they want, but J.D. Vance in that clip you played was just very blunt about this, and there's nothing that has changed on the ground, making Iran a bigger threat since fall of 2024. In fact, Iran's been degraded a lot since fall of 2024, and so this is a total betrayal of his own voters. But to the actual plan here, I think what Ben just laid out is totally incoherent. Right, like if the idea here is that this is a moment where the Iranian people have an opportunity to grab their own freedom and we're going to help them. Okay, well, that requires troops on the ground. I mean, like that would be a coherent objective. At least we want to free the Iranian people from the Ayatollah. We're not saying that we're going to do that. Pete Hegseth was out saying that this is not a regime change operation, and we are not doing democracy promotion. Pete Hegseth said that. So we can't both be on the side of the Iranian people and also not be interested in a regime change war and democracy promotion. Like you have to do one or the other. The Iranian people cannot overthrow.
Tim, I would simply say to you, Syria. I mean, in Syria, very recently, we saw the overthrow of Bashar al-Assad very, very quickly, and it was actually driven by the people. Now, there are legitimate concerns about the leader of the rebel group, but so far, you would say tentatively, it's been an improvement on what the Syrian people were enduring under Assad.
If you look at how regime change or internal uprisings usually happen, they don't just come from outside pressure alone. Take places like Syria or even Libya. Those situations weren't just about airstrikes or outside influence. They involved years of internal instability, fractured leadership, and in many cases, direct or indirect ground support. Even then, the outcomes were messy and often led to long-term instability rather than clean transitions. Iran is on a completely different level. It has a population of over 80 million, a deeply entrenched security apparatus, and groups like the IRGC that are designed specifically to prevent uprisings. Historically, protests there, like the ones in 2019, were shut down quickly and brutally. So the idea that pressure from the outside alone would suddenly trigger a successful uprising doesn't really line up with how these things have played out in the past. There's also the strategic contradiction. You can't say the goal isn't regime change while also hoping the government collapses. Those are two very different paths, and each comes with completely different requirements. If the goal is just to weaken capabilities, that's one thing. But if the expectation is political transformation, that usually requires a much deeper, long-term commitment, which comes with huge risk. And then there's the shift in messaging. A big part of Donald Trump's appeal was avoiding prolonged foreign conflicts. Moving toward a more aggressive stance doesn't just raise policy questions, it creates real tension with the expectations of the people who supported that approach in the first place.
But it's going to be a long game to watch.
Sure,
there.
Piers.
But certainly, my point being, the United States objective was achieved there without boots on the ground, wasn't it?
Well, no, that was Turkey's objective.
Yes.
In the United States, that was not our objective. We weren't like Turkey armed a rebel group in Syria. Is that what we're going to do? Okay, again, that would be a coherent plan. Like, we have picked a group. Pompeo said over the weekend, we like the MEK or the Kurds or whoever. We're going to arm them and provide them weapons and intelligence. That's what Turkey did. And I think they ended up having kind of catastrophic success in Syria. I don't even think that Turkey planned on that group so easily toppling the Assad regime. But again, maybe that could happen in Iran. The point that I'm trying to make, Piers, is that there is no coherent objective being offered by this administration. Like, you have Ben Ferguson on right now saying that what they want is freedom for the Iranian people. That's not what Pete Hegseth was saying this morning.
No,
that's not. Donald Trump. Just really quick, one more thing. Donald Trump.
I want to
just let me do one more thing, then you can talk, Ben. One more thing. Donald Trump said that he, like you, pointed to Venezuela and talked about how successful that is. This is very different from Venezuela in a couple of reasons. Number one, 4 people have already died. That didn't happen in Venezuela. Number two, we had a clear successor. Donald Trump told the New York Times that we had 2 or 3 successors in mind. All of them are dead. They've all been killed. He said to The Atlantic or to John Carl, I think, at ABC last night, that we don't know who the successor is now. So this is very much not a Venezuela situation. It is not a regime change.
I refer to Venezuela about troops on the ground in response to that. And I think you're intellectually honest enough to understand that. I don't think I have to explain it to you like a third grader. I think you're now just trying to act like Venezuela and Iran are the same thing. They're very different places. That is obvious.
You were the one that said they're the same thing.
The point I made about Venezuela was very simple. We had troops go in and take out the leader, and then we left. That's the same thing that we're talking about now.
Right. Well, 4 troops have died in this case, so it's already very different than that. It's already very different than that. 4 troops have died.
Again,
so it's already very different, and we don't even have a successor
soldiers dying for a political point you're trying to score. I know you don't like the president. I know you don't like this plan. But let me also say this about Iran.
What's the plan?
There are 2 objectives here. I'm going to tell you the 2 objectives since you put words in my mouth. Number one, it's to make sure you take out a regime that is sponsoring terrorism all over the world and has made it very clear that they want to do what they did in Israel, also in America and other places. So it's a national security standpoint there. It's also a national security standpoint with oil in the Strait of Hormuz as well. That's very clear. They're worried about that area as well. And the third is, yes, when you get rid of someone like this, of course, you want the people to be able to be free in their country and not be able to be killed in the streets like we've witnessed, where tens of thousands of them have been exterminated in the last month while they try to stand up to their regime. So there can be multiple things here. Is that different than Venezuela? Of course, because every nation is different. I think you should know that.
Yeah.
This debate really shows the difference between having goals and actually having a strategy. Because saying you want to weaken a regime, protect global security, and maybe even spark freedom inside a country, those are objectives. But historically, when the US has tried to do all of those at once without a clear plan, it hasn't gone smoothly. Iraq is the obvious example. The initial mission was quick, but the lack of a clear post-war plan led to years of instability, insurgency, and trillions in costs. And Iran is an even tougher case. It's not just a country. It's a regional power with proxy networks across the Middle East, from Lebanon to Yemen. Intelligence experts have pointed out for years that even if you damage parts of its military, the broader influence doesn't just disappear overnight. That's why most past strategies, whether under Barack Obama or others, focused more on containment and monitoring rather than outright dismantling. The other big issue is this comparison to places like Venezuela or Syria. Those situations had very specific conditions: internal fractures, outside backers, or identifiable opposition groups. Right now, even US officials have admitted there isn't a clear successor or unified opposition in Iran. That matters because removing leadership without knowing what comes next usually creates a power vacuum, not stability. And then there's the human cost already showing up. Once you have casualties, even a few, that changes the entire equation. It's no longer hypothetical or strategic, it's real, and it raises the stakes on every next decision. So the tension in this debate isn't really about whether Iran poses a threat. Most people agree it does. It's about whether the current approach actually lines up with the outcome being talked about.
So you could be in a position by the summer where Donald Trump actually has affected genuine change there. The people have risen up and Iran is removed of a 47-year repressive regime. And that could play well for Trump. And it could lead to the Abraham Accords, having Saudi Arabia join it and others, because I do think the big strategic error Iran has made is attacking the Gulf states. And I think the moment they've done that, they've lined up all these places like UAE, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and others lined up now behind an America-Israel a pact going into Iran, which I didn't think I'd ever see. So I think a lot of things are possible here. Tim, your response to my thoughts.
Things. Yeah, a couple things. I mean, look, just how strained that hypothetical case of how it could possibly go well is, I think speaks to the just political disaster and the danger of this situation for Trump. Obviously he's high on his own supply because some of these other, one-off strikes have gone well. This is obviously very different than that. Yes, obviously he's being influenced by MBS and BB to a degree that they might be just kind of walking around the dog park at this point, convincing him to get into this. But this is such a different scenario than all of those other scenarios, as mentioned earlier. And thanks, Dave, for the update on the language. But 4 American troops are already dead. And again, for what? In your strained scenario, the best case scenario is that maybe in the future there'll be an internal struggle in Iran and a regime that we like better, but we don't know who it is, will be taking control. If you polled the American people just 2 weeks ago and said, hey, would it be worth 4 American deaths for the possibility that maybe Iran might get a better regime, but we're not sure who it is? I think that would be a 20 to 80. Only 20% of the country, like Ben and a couple of his buddies, would be for that. Most of the Republicans wouldn't be for that. And look at this panel. Jack was one of Trump's biggest supporters. He's hedging on this, in his answer.
I supported him.
Dave was one of Trump's biggest supporters. He's even more hostile than me against this. He's calling us terrorists. I'm not even that far. Among Trump's own base, this is a disaster. Independent voters, you look at polls of all ages. Last independent poll I saw had 19% in support of this among independents. And the best case scenario you can point out is that maybe there'll be some new leadership, but we don't know who it is, and we're not supporting a particular person. That's crazy. It's a crazy risk. And sure, the Arab states are with us for now. But are they going to continue to be if their hotels and their oil reserves are being bombed? Or are the people of UAE and Qatar and Saudi as on board with this as their leadership? I'm skeptical of that. What about our European allies? Oil prices in Europe are up 50% today. And this thing is already a disaster. We're on day 3 and they have no plan for getting out of it. It's we're going to bomb them for 4 more weeks and hope that something good happens.
Yes, on paper, that scenario sounds great. The regime collapses, people rise up, everything stabilizes, and suddenly you've got a more aligned Middle East. But if you actually look at how these situations have played out historically, it almost never goes that clean, even when regimes fall. Like in Iraq or Libya, what followed wasn't immediate stability. It was years of chaos, power struggles, and in some cases even worse conditions for civilians. And Iran isn't some small or fragile state. It's one of the most structurally resilient regimes in the region, with a security apparatus specifically built to crush crush internal dissent. The 2022 protests showed that pretty clearly. Massive demonstrations, global attention, and yet the government still held firm. So expecting a sudden tipping point just because of external pressure doesn't really line up with how things have gone before. Then there's the regional angle. Sure, some Gulf governments might align strategically in the short term, but that doesn't mean their populations are on board. Public opinion in places like Saudi Arabia or Qatar can shift fast if conflict starts hitting closer to home, especially if infrastructure or oil routes get disrupted. And once that happens, political support can get shaky real quick. The economic side is another big one people overlook. The Strait of Hormuz handles about 20% of the world's oil supply. Even minor disruptions there can spike global prices, and we've already seen how sensitive markets are to just headlines. That doesn't just affect the region, that hits everyday people worldwide, from gas prices to inflation. And finally, there's the basic question: what's the actual end game? Because hoping something better might emerge without knowing what it is or who leads it isn't really a strategy. It's more like rolling the dice and hoping the outcome works itself out. So the real issue here isn't whether change in Iran would be good, it's whether the current path actually gets you there or just opens the door to something even more unpredictable.